Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things that are beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and you can find me elsewhere online as Sourtelling, that's A Sourtelling, and that is my username on Instagram and Ravelry, where we also have a Ravelry group for this video channel and podcast. This is a video about how to wind up a ball of yarn with no equipment. So if, like me, you don't own a ball winder and you don't own a Swift, but you need to wind up a ball of yarn, this video tutorial is for you. So why do you need to wind up a ball of yarn? Well, if you purchase yarn that is sold in a hank like this, you need to wind it up before you can knit with it. So if I untwist this hank, you can see that it comes as a large loop of yarn, and if you find the end and try and knit with this, you are going to get into a tangled mess and it is not going to be fun. So you need to wind this up before you can knit with it. The other reason that you might need to wind up yarn is if you purchase it on a cone and it's not practical to carry, you know, a big cone around with you. I've knitted quite a lot of yarn off this cone already, but when it came it was much larger and it was very big, bulky and heavy, so I wound off some yarn so that it was more transportable. And a third reason could be if you have yarn that's on a cone and you might want to knit with the yarn held double, you're going to need to be winding off some smaller quantities of yarn so that you can knit with it 2 strands, because you ain't going to be able to do it off the cone on its own. So in order to wind a ball of yarn, you don't need any equipment, you just need your body, and if you want, a little bit of furniture that's lying around as a prop. You might think that you have to buy a ball winder and Swift, but obviously they're pieces of equipment that come with a cost. Yes, they do speed up greatly, but you know, there's a financial purchase that needs to be made, and also there's storage issues. If you don't have the capacity to have more equipment in your home, this is an option for you. So I'm going to be showing you how to wind off a ball of yarn using my knees and my hands. And along the way, I'll point out a few other options and possibilities that you could explore too. Let's get started. So I'm going to start with my hank of yarn and I'm just going to untwist it. So there'll be an end that you can undo and let it spin out. And then I'm going to carefully open it out into the loop of yarn. Oh, as you can see, it's already trying to get tangled, so do be careful when you're doing this. Now what you'll find with your loop of yarn is that there are little ties around at sections, so you need to go ahead and unpick those ties while keeping the loop as straight as you can. So what I would do is I would put my wrists into the loop, and you know, you can afford to be quite firm with your yarn. Pull it taut and find those ties, and they'll be tied off in a knot, and if you want you can unpick the knot, so even no equipment, but I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut the knot off. Carefully, looking at the work and not the video so that I don't cut my hand, and I'm going to do that going around the loop of yarn at intervals and doing that all the way around. Okay, there were only 2 little loops of yarn holding my hank together, so I've cut them both off now, and then you need to find the end, which should make itself apparent, but if it doesn't, just kind of give it a loose shake whilst holding on to the outer tube. All right. So the next thing is you need to do something with this. What I do is I sit up on the sofa with my knees up like this. I put it around my knees like so, and then I find the end. If this position is not available for your body and your mobility, another thing that you could do is grab a sofa cushion and put the loop of yarn around the sofa cushion, okay? And then it's kind of portable and it's soft and you can put it on your lap. Or another thing that people often do is they put the loop of yarn round the back of a chair. Personally, I don't do that because of the style of chairs that I have in my home. The yarn tends to get caught on the chairs. And also the chair is quite big and heavy. So I just go for the sofa cushion or my knees. Because the theme of this video is how to wind up a ball of yarn with no equipment, I'm just going to show you me doing it on my knees now. So I've got my loop of yarn all laid out. I've found my end, which gets lost easily. And I'm taking the end of the yarn, I'm taking 2 fingers and I'm loosely wrapping it around my fingers about 10 times. And as I do that, I'm keeping my fingers a little bit open, like I'm making a peace sign. So loosely wind it around your fingers while making a peace sign. Far out. And after you've done that for a few times, so I'm just going round and round, you're going to need to start to feed off the end of yarn from around your loop of your hank, which is sitting on your knees, on your cushion, on the back of your chair, wherever is available to you. So you just wind off a little bit at a time, about 1 metre or 1 yard at a time, no more. And you start going around your fingers. After your little loop of yarn is around a centimetre, half an inch or so thick, it's not an exact science, what you need to do is pinch it down, okay, and then start wrapping around the middle. And you can see I'm catching my finger in it a little bit, and that's literally just to keep it loose. You don't want to be pulling it too tight. So now I've pinched it and I'm wrapping it around the middle a little bit. And then you kind of fold it in half and you go in the opposite direction. Okay? After about 10 or 20 wraps, it's not an exact science, you rotate it 90 degrees, go in the opposite direction. And at this point you can see I'm still catching my fingers in it just to keep it a little bit loose. Okay? Rotate it, go round. So I'm just moving back into this position so that I can unwrap a little bit of yarn off my knees, not too much, and I just wrap it around a few times, rotate it 90 degrees, wrap it around a bunch of times, rotate it, wrap. Okay, and now I've got to a point where my little wrap of yarn starts resembling a tiny little ball that a little kitten might like to play with. So it's getting easier to hold, and I no longer have to wrap around my fingers because it's becoming an object in its own right. Just keep doing the same thing, wrapping it round and rotating it, wrapping it round for a bit and then rotating it. And then as you can see, as I unwind my yarn from the hank, I'm kind of trying to keep my little ball of yarn that I am winding along with it. And the reason for that is, if you unwind too much yarn, it risks tangling up. And if you have too much stray yarn going on, it risks tangling up. All right, so you might say to me, oh, but what if I don't have enough time to wind the whole ball of yarn in one sitting? You can stop at any point and put your hank of yarn down. What I tend to do is I tend to just pick it up, making sure that I keep it in the circle, and put it on the arm of the sofa, like so. And then I'll just make sure that my little ball of yarn is kept very safe and isn't going to fall on the floor, get knocked or get lost. Alternatively, if you know that you have to stop completely, I would suggest that you take your hank of yarn and you actually hang it on a clothes hanger, which should keep the hank of yarn completely safe, you know, opened up, and it shouldn't get tangled up. And then you can take your little ball of yarn and just put it in a bag and hang that bag on the coat hanger so that it won't get lost. So the main thing to do is just try and prevent tangles at all times. Another tip, as you're winding up your yarn, sometimes you might find that there's a little snag, a weak point in the yarn, or even a knot. That's happened to me here. I found a weak point in the yarn where one of the strands has snapped. It happens. Sometimes there's a knot. I wouldn't ignore that point. Definitely stop and break the yarn. So I'm just going to cut it with a pair of scissors and cut out the weak part. You know, cut out the knot, don't just leave it there, make sure that you undo it. And then, so now I've got one little tiny ball, and I still need to finish up winding the hank of yarn that I've got left. So I've just wound up a bit more of my ball, so I've got it roughly back to the place where I was. And I just wanted to point out what my dwindling hank of yarn is starting to look like. Because when I first started winding it, you could see that the yarn was coming off really nicely all around the loops. But to be honest with you, that doesn't always happen. I thought that this was quite a good example because as I'm taking it round, suddenly the yarn is caught underneath one loop, it's going over another, there's another bit that wants to come out. I'm risking looking like Mr. Tickle, you know, with like the long orange arms all hanging out. And I thought that this was worth pointing out because this really happens. But these kind of tangles, you know, they don't tend to be illustrated in like knitting books and stuff like that. But you know, this is real life, it tangles. And what should you do when you see a knot, when you see a tangle, when you come across it? You need to stop and untangle it straight away. Don't keep yanking at the yarn and hoping that it will just sort itself out on its own, because it won't. It will just come back way later and bite you in the bum. So when you're unwinding it and suddenly you're seeing, you know, stuff like this all coming up, just go in there and sort it out. So my ball now has taken on a real life of its own. It is its own object and it's really formed by these wraps. The way that you keep it spherical, you know, like a ball, is that you need to keep wrapping and turning all the time. If you keep wrapping around the same spot, it's going to just grow out like a funny rubber ring or something like that. So you need to keep rotating it as you wrap it around. And that's it. I've turned my hank into a ball. Now it's all ready to knit with. I hope that this video was useful and informative for you. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up down below and leave me a comment letting me know what you think about my method. Do you also use your body to wrap up yarn? Are you a bit more reliant on furniture as props? What's your approach? The Crimson Stitchery has a regular podcast episode 1 or 2 times a month, so do tune in for that. More tutorials, videos, and happy knitting.